the Azure Advanced Migration Lead for public sector. So I work with not only federal government agencies in the DoD and intelligence agency and civilian, but also with state and local government and education customers. And for the last, 2 years, we've been really helping them with their work from home strategies. I'll mention, because Ron mentioned somebody was here online from Connecticut. I actually live in Connecticut, and everything I'm showing from my basement in Connecticut. And I'll show you, we'll do a quick demo of the Azure Virtual Desktop technology, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's running from an Azure government data center down in Virginia, because that's where I keep all my stuff. But I'm not going to belabor the point, but we all understand why work from anywhere matters so much. COVID's changed how we all work, and that's what's really been shaping my days in the agencies that I've been supporting for the last 2 years. We expect unforeseen events are going to continue. There's unrest on the Ukrainian border. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on around Taiwan. Things could happen at any minute from a geopolitical perspective, but also weather. We got snow yesterday, and it's still all over the ground up here in Connecticut. What we need is flexibility and agility, because that's the new norm. We need to be able to be agile when we're providing services to our end users. And as Gartner was brought up earlier, they recognize that as well, and they see that there's going to be a lot of demand for remote desktop services being shaped by this COVID crisis. One of the things we saw during COVID was that a lot of agencies and organizations tried to scale up remote work, but it didn't work very well. They couldn't scale up their VPNs, and from a security perspective, VPNs are horrible because they let end users and people who have access to end user computers into the chewy center of your network through the crunchy outer shell. And not just that, but to scale up, to get sufficient VPN capacity, you really need a lot of gear. So a lot of organizations were caught flat-footed, not able to get VPN capacity to scale up, even though it wasn't probably the optimal way to address some of the work from home challenges that they had. And scaling up VDI on premises, while it can help secure that data, it has an even higher cost. You still have to incur that network cost, but you need incremental compute, storage, and typically VDI-related licensing, the license protocols and management tools, and all those other things that you would need for a VDI infrastructure. And either way, once you invest in all that, go through the capital appropriations process, buy all that stuff, you're now stuck with an infrastructure that you're locked into for a number of years. And that doesn't necessarily make you particularly agile as requirements for GPUs or compute evolve. What we're seeing too is that the post-COVID era is going to continue from a work from home perspective. People are abandoning leased properties from a real estate perspective for commercial real estate, and it's happening in the government space as well. There's a lot of leased space and people are just not returning to it. The other thing that's happening is it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a data center near a building that isn't occupied. So why do you need to scale up a VDI infrastructure in your data center? People are evacuating their data centers, and that's the characteristics of cloud. So what we saw at the pandemic was organizations that had invested in Microsoft 365 or Windows Enterprise Software Assurance were able to quickly and securely deploy desktops in Azure, because what some organizations found out was that their existing investment in Office 365, M365, and Azure AD let them and gave them the rights to run desktop operating systems in Azure with no incremental cost from a licensing perspective. They only needed to pay for the compute, storage, and networking that they needed in Azure. They didn't need complicated, expensive VDI software. They didn't need Windows licenses like they might need in other cloud environments that ends up being an incremental cost. The other thing they found was Azure Virtual Desktop, the desktop technology that we provided in Azure, leverages the same Azure Active Directory infrastructure that many of them already deployed for Office 365. So the desktops and applications are published to users using those Azure Active Directory credentials that people have for Office 365. They log in. If MFA's configured to secure and keep those identities locked up tight, then it's going to be the same identity process and login process that they've already gone through their security team to get past for Office 365. So it ends up being not they don't need to deploy much more from a security perspective to support the logins. The other thing that was interesting too is Microsoft went through the arduous process of getting federal FedRAMP high accreditation for both the Azure Commercial, Azure Global Infrastructure, and Azure Government, which meant that organizations that work with the government, that serve the government, that are the government, or even entities that want to be have a high level of compliance, we're all set up to do desktop deployments in Azure with a relatively high level of accreditation, which was great. We also pursued DoD Impact Level 2, 4, and 5 accreditation. So depending on where you deploy, DoD agencies and affiliated contractors meet those, depending on characteristics of the deployment, meet all those government requirements, which is awesome. But the really important thing is that it provides ubiquitous access to all the applications people needed, be it Office, Adobe, SAP, Esri for geospatial type work, mapping, all those kinds of things, all the engineering workloads. All this stuff just works. It works in these desktops in Azure, and it's easy to publish, and I'll show you all that. So what can I do with Azure Virtual Desktop? I can publish applications out to Windows clients, Windows 7, 10, 11, Mac, iOS, Android, or any HTML5 compatible browser or thin clients. And I can use different VM types to meet different mission requirements or workload requirements. Think fast storage, high core counts, GPUs, enhanced networking. The logon experience is just user pops in their email address, their UPN for Office 365, they enter their password, they get an MFA prompt, and then they get access to either applications or desktops, and these are general purpose applications and desktops that they can run, that appear to run locally on their computer, or you can actually publish out higher end compute. And one of the great use cases we've seen have been around things like one organization went and put all their month-end closing on a super high-end set of virtual desktops that they keep in Azure. And when they go in, the users just double-click. It fires up the desktop for the time that they're using it, like a 32-core desktop with a quarter terabyte of RAM. They run their process, and then they shut it down. So they've got those there and ready to go, but they can get that burstable capacity, and the administrator doesn't have to do anything because it's pre-provisioned up. They set it all up, it shuts it down, they only pay for the storage, and then once a month they go in and use all that high core count. Kind of a neat way to go, and that's all published based on their Azure Active Directory groups and roles. Now, we've also seen that rather than publishing out desktops, applications have been very popular. So publishing out something as simple as Outlook with the Windows type experience that people have become accustomed to working on their desktop has been really valuable in a work from home scenario, because it allowed people to use an iPad or Android tablet or just a browser to get that full rich experience of things like Outlook without the burden of publishing a full desktop. And publishing to a tablet like that, the benefit of using Azure Virtual Desktop and the remote app experience, like I'm showing in the screenshot, is really that when the user closes it, there's no residual email. It didn't use a lot of resources on that tablet. There's no storage being leveraged other than for the remote desktop client. And when they closed it, there wasn't any email on it. So it didn't exfiltrate data to that device, just the user experience. Now, if I were browsing in or using the client on my iPhone like I'm showing here, the Outlook experience probably isn't very usable. I've got bifocals, I don't have my camera on, but I can't see on a 4 or 5 inch screen what Outlook looks like. But from a security perspective, what you can do, and what we found to be very valuable, was dealing with technology debt that a lot of organizations had run into. For example, we had one state agency I was working for had Kronos as a timekeeping app, and they had a very old deployment that required them to use Internet Explorer to do time management. And when people started working from home, they didn't have Internet Explorer still on their home computers. Well, what was the agency going to do? Were they going to beef up their VPN capacity and make people reinstall Internet Explorer just to do their weekly timekeeping? Certainly not. That wouldn't make a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. You have to buy VPN capacity, and you have to put an unmanaged, unsecure browser on someone's home computer. That would create all sorts of security challenges. So what they did instead was they published Internet Explorer in Azure from Azure Virtual Desktops, from VMs, multi-user Windows installs there, And they locked the browser that was secured in Azure to only go to the timekeeping app, so that users could, regardless of the device that they had, go into Azure Virtual Desktop, protected with MFA, get to a secured, managed version of Internet Explorer that only got to their timekeeping app, and now they could do their timekeeping from anywhere. And this allowed them to roll out and extend that technology debt a little bit longer, but until they had an opportunity to upgrade Kronos. But a great example of how this innovative technology can help you get past other issues. Certainly what we're seeing, though, are more organizations are using it for high compute scenarios, be it geospatial or data analytics related. Now, to use, to use Azure Virtual Desktop, this desktop service in Azure, really what most organizations, as I mentioned before, really loved and benefited from was their existing Microsoft licensing. If you have M365, or more importantly, Windows Enterprise, which is a component of M365, you've got everything you need to run operating systems in Azure. That's not like other cloud-hosted environments. If you were going to do a deployment in a different cloud service, these Windows entitlements, because of a lack of Windows mobility to shared hosted environments and other hyperscale clouds, you'd have to essentially rent Windows again and pay. That would be part of the fees that you'd have to pay for that. But your existing Windows licenses can be used in Azure. It's an Azure benefit. So really all you're going to be paying for is the compute, storage, and networking that you're going to leverage in Azure. The operating systems that you can deploy and run are client operating systems, including Windows 7, where you would get extended security update support because you're running in Azure, Windows 10 Enterprise, which you probably already have in your organization, Windows 11 Enterprise you might be looking at, as well as down here, these Windows Server operating systems. What we found is a lot of organizations want to run VDI environments in the cloud, but they don't necessarily want to give everybody their own virtual machine. They want to get the benefits of kind of what they used to do from a session-based delivery with Citrix, where they would do a XenApp deployment, maybe put 10 or 20 or 30 users all on one virtual machine, not give them local admin rights, and save on compute. And there really are significant savings by putting multiple users on a virtual machine. The challenge with using a Windows Server operating system for that is you need a remote desktop services CAL. So Microsoft created, to get past that, a couple of versions of Windows, similar to Windows 10 Enterprise, which you already have, but we created Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, which gives you a high-fidelity Windows 10 experience, but allows you to put multiple users on one virtual machine, saving a lot from a compute perspective, and also because it's a client operating system, there's not a requirement for an RDS CAL. So about 80% of what we're seeing in Azure at this point for remote desktops is really leveraging these Windows Enterprise multi-session operating systems because of the economic benefit and the license entitlements customers have. So they're firing up Windows 10 Enterprise and now Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session and putting multiple users on them to get higher user densities with the cost of fewer cores. And you really, Azure's the only place you can really do that. So I'll show you I should have skipped ahead and showed you the architecture, and I'll do that real quick because there may be a question about Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. A couple of months ago, Microsoft introduced something called Windows 365, which is a fixed cost per month persistent desktop offering where every user would get assigned a license, and then they'd get a desktop assigned to them in Azure. It's built upon Azure Virtual Desktop, and it's something that you can procure as part of your M365 licensing as an add-on that gives you a fixed cost per month for your users. We haven't seen much use of it yet in Azure Government just because of the way the SKUs work out. But on the commercial side, people are very interested in it because it sometimes makes their procurement teams a little less uneasy about the variability of cost in Azure. They want a fixed cost. So it's Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 are really based on the exact same technology. They're really just kind of slightly different deployment and procurement models. There's also, from a high-level architecture perspective, they leverage the exact same client technology, and I'll show you that in just a second, on Windows, Mac, iOS, or Android, and they all use the RDP protocol, Remote Desktop Services Protocol, but it's used a little bit different in a way more secure manner from a deployment perspective. When a user logs into Azure Public or Azure Government, they're gonna log in using their Azure Active Directory credential, and they're gonna get a list of applications or desktops that are published to that identity running on Windows 7, 10, 11, or Windows Server. And when they double click on that the icon for the application or the desktop, they're gonna go through the gateway services, the connection broker, and it's gonna provide them. The connection broker is gonna connect to a virtual machine in your secure Azure subscription, and that virtual machine is going to call back through that broker infrastructure using the remote desktop protocol, rather than having the user RDP to the VM. So it's using a reverse connect kind of dialogue to call back out securely through the broker infrastructure. So it's infinitely more secure than merely using RDP and RDPing to a desktop, if that makes any sense. And that's why government agencies are pretty happy with it. But it's using the tried and true RDP protocol just in a reverse connect sort of way. So the VMs that you're running in your environment don't require public IP addresses on the internet. They're going to be communicating through this connection broker infrastructure, which is multi-tenant, kind of similar to the web rendering infrastructure that you would have for going to portal.office.com to check your email. For Windows 365, it's very similar from an architecture perspective. You're still going to use the same clients, you're going to use the same connection broker and gateway infrastructure, but the deployment is actually going to run in a Microsoft managed subscription, and it's going to be either Windows 10 or Windows 11 single session VMs rather than those multi-session VMs I mentioned before. And that's going to be typically connected into an end customer's subscription from a networking perspective, where they can get access to things like Active Directory if they want to be domain joined for the virtual machines, and you may have an express router site to say VPN to make all that happen. But that's pretty typical from a deployment perspective. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what this technology actually looks like, and hopefully you can see right now. This is the Windows Remote Desktop client, and I've deployed and I mentioned I'm in Connecticut. Everything I'm going to show you is running in an Azure government data center down in Virginia. And I'll just start with a couple of applications that I pre-fired up. So here I've actually got an engineering application, FreeCAD. It's a CAD application. I'm running on a non-GPU accelerated desktop. And like I said, I'm showing you this in Connecticut. Hopefully it's a smooth experience. And what's neat about this application is, to start it all up, all I did was I went here and double-clicked on FreeCAD. And then it fired it up. Looks like it's running locally, but in fact, it's not. It's running down in a VM in Azure Government in one of our Virginia data centers. What's neat about this application is when I authenticated with Azure Active Directory, and I went through various MFA prompts to do that, it actually modified my local home computer here and actually gave me access to all the icons for the applications we see here, to the point where I could even pin them like FreeCAD to my start menu, to my taskbar, and give an end user a super tight, high fidelity experience. I even get, for the remote applications, I even get a thumbnail available. And I can see here other applications like I've got Outlook running, ArcGIS, Esri Earth as an application. I've just got the Boston MBTA map overlay in there with all the MBTA stops listed. And I can even run Teams. And this is what's really kind of interesting when we get into work from home. And you'll hear from Jeremy on our team at Microsoft in a couple of minutes about Teams integration. But I just want to point out that with this Azure Virtual Desktop technology, we've done a lot to optimize it. And so the Teams client I'm showing you here, which has telephony and screen sharing and video and all those other great things from a collaboration perspective, is running in our Virginia data center. And I've deployed it with something called AVD Media Optimization. And because I'm running on a Windows host on my computer, and I'm running the Windows client, and this works with Mac as well, if I were to make a call with this client that's actually running down in Virginia, it's going to take advantage of my TCP/IP stack on my local computer and try to optimize the call flow. So if I called my wife here in Connecticut using this Teams client, it would actually use my local internet connection and call her there. So it wouldn't push the traffic all the way back down to Virginia and then have the call flow from there. Kind of a neat thing we've done. We've optimized that with Teams, Zoom, a couple other technologies. But this is one of the things that's really driving that change to work from home, or some of these optimizations. Like I said, I think Jeremy's going to go into more detail on Teams and some of these other pieces. I'll also show you, because I showed you some of these applications, I'll show you real quick what the the desktop experience looks like. I've fired up a couple of different types of desktops. Here I've got a Windows 7 desktop, Windows subsystem for Linux for developer types who want to run containerized Linux in Windows, and I can have 4 or 5 different versions of Linux all running on my desktop at the same time. A Windows 11 pooled instance, which is running that Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session Operating System, where I could have, again, 20, 30 users all using one virtual machine to improve the economics of the deployment. A shared pool desktop with Windows 10, a personal dedicated desktop just running Windows 10 Enterprise, and a GPU accelerated desktop. Now, all these desktops, I fired a bunch of them up earlier, and they're actually here on this icon. And what I want to point out before I go into any of these desktops is really that I can support a multi-monitor experience remotely. So here we can see I've got a single monitor here, but with Windows 11, this pooled experience, I've actually got 3 monitors fired up. And for the shared pooled experience, I'll click on that, I'm seeing 3 full monitors of screen available to me here. And I know I'm only sharing one screen, but we can provide end users with up to 16 monitors if they've got a computer that'll support it on either a Mac or a Windows device for a multi-monitor experience they probably have started to grow accustomed to. Also point out that we can provide out of Azure not just standard compute, but GPU-enabled compute. Right now, procurement is killing a lot of organizations because it's hard to buy laptops, it's hard to buy desktops, and it's even harder to find those unicorn GPU cards, the graphics cards that a lot of folks use for engineering or geospatial workloads. Well, Microsoft buys a lot of them, and we put them into Azure for people to take advantage of them. And this is just an example of an older NVIDIA Tesla M60 GPU where I've provisioned up a virtual machine, and I was just running a quick demo. One of the other neat things about running your desktop services in Azure, besides the fact you can turn them off and give the compute back to Microsoft and not pay for it, is your proximity to the internet. And if I just fire up, say, speed test on one of these virtual machines, again, this experience is running in an Azure Gov data center down in Virginia. I'm going to hit go on speed test. I live in Connecticut. It isn't modern times in Connecticut. As some of you who live up in the Northeast know, we've got oil tanks to heat our houses, wells, septic systems. We're lucky to have electricity and cable. But what you're seeing here is speed test running on a VM down in Azure Gov where I'm running on a physical host that has multiple 40 gig Ethernet connections. And I'm QoS down to 2 gigs download speed, and it looks like about 1 gig upload speed. But that's crazy bandwidth to provide to an end user. And it's all a function of running in Azure in a very economical deployment mode. So kind of interesting, and this is what a lot of organizations like. They like the proximity to the internet or proximity to your corporate network that can be securely provided to your end users. So kind of a neat use case around that. I can show you more on the user experience. One thing I did want to show you is that this is the client that I've pre-deployed. If I wanted to go in through a web browser, and I'll just I just double-clicked and it went over to my other screen. I can log in and I've already got a token available. So I'm going to see the exact same stuff I just saw. I logged into the Azure Gov well-known URL to get into the AVD environment. So it's a .us because it's Azure Gov, it'd be .com if it was commercial. And then I can go and fire up any of these resources. So if I, for example, select this shared pooled experience, click here, I'm going to have to enter my password in because I didn't implement single sign-on in my environment. But I can pop right into a desktop experience. And what it's doing is it actually went, it recognized me because I was the same user I was before. It terminated that multi-monitor experience I showed you before, if you remember this engineering app coming up, and it pulled my session over into the web browser. So I can transfer my session between devices, between end clients. Here, like I said, I'm running in a web browser. I lost my multi-monitor experience because my web browser is only a single monitor. So some of the clients are a little less capable, some are more capable, but it's great to have the flexibility to provide access to all these different platforms, thin clients, and web browsers as well. I know I think I've got about 5 more minutes. I'm just going to pop into the Azure Portal because I don't know if you guys have seen how easy it is to deploy compute in Azure, but to deploy remote desktops in Azure, it's a very straightforward process. All I have to do is go to the search bar, type in Azure Virtual Desktop, and again, I'm in Azure Government, not in Azure Commercial, but the user experience is going to be pretty similar. I would create a host pool of compute, hit create. I'm going to call this Angelbeat. I'll just call it Angel. Angel. I'm going to call my resource group is not Angel. I'm going to go into my resource group, which is kind of a security boundary. I'm going to call it WVD. And my host pool name, I'm going to call Angel. And this is going to create a pool of compute in our Azure Virginia data center that I'm going to make pooled, where I can put, say, 30 users per virtual machine on, add a virtual machine. I'm going to name them Angel. This is the prefix for the Azure, or for the Active Directory domain account, computer account I'm going to make, as well as for other resources I'm going to create in Azure. I'm going to select a gallery image where I can pick something that Microsoft has already provisioned for me. Some already have Office 365 pre-installed. I'll just close that. I have actually an image where I've injected all sorts of other interesting applications, so I'm just going to use that. I can change my VM size to meet the compute requirements I have. If I'm going to have 30 users on here, gosh, I'm probably going to want maybe 8 or 16 cores. I'll go for 16 cores on my VM, and I'll make 2 VMs, so I'll have 60 users worth of compute deployed in a matter of minutes. Put it down here, put it on a network, select my default, and then I just select whether I'm going to Active Directory join these VMs or Azure Active Directory join them. Give it a credential, give it a password. I can specify what OU I'm going to put it in if I want to in Active Directory, like otherwise CN equals computers, if you know what that means. That's where it's going to go. Give it a local admin, and then I'm pretty much done. If I type my password right, boom, next, 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 create, and in 10 minutes, I'll have compute for 60 users provisioned up in my environment. And then all I have to do is pop into the Azure virtual desktop environment here, assign my users to an application group that's going to be created here, because it's in the process of provisioning the various resources that I want to have provisioned, add it to a workshop. Oh, there it is. See, there's our host pool. So it's making those VMs. This is the application group. I would just assign users to it under assignments, and away we go, period. It's a very flexible technology. I can publish, as I showed you, a lot of Windows. If I wanted access into Linux even, I can do that. Some sleight of hand here. I'm in an Ubuntu desktop, published out of Azure. Linux is our friend. And I think that's what I have for you, Ron. I don't know if there's time for questions at this point. I was trying to get through a lot of stuff, but maybe I'll just pop back to my slides and wrap up.
Great. There are a couple of things. Alan wanted to know what's the difference between Office 365, Microsoft 365, and Windows 365. I think you covered that. And Alan, by the way, works for the Federal Mediation Service, so he's right in your bailiwick.
Yeah, we call everything 365 now because we're obsessed with numbers. I guess that number. Yeah, so Office 365 is really those Office services and typically the Office suite that it's productivity components. Microsoft 365 is a superset of licenses that includes Windows from a client license entitlement perspective, and things like our security suite, EMS, that's in there that provide enhanced multi-factor authentication and client management. Windows 365 is an add-on that is, again, that per user per month fixed fee cost for Azure Virtual Desktop to deploy on top of it. So great question. All those 365s are very confusing, and I'm sure your Microsoft account team would love to have you explore those things if you're interested.
Got it. And Alan, I'll put you in touch with John and his team, because I'm sure there's someone who covers your agency. Sure. For Tom and Cindy, just want to remind everyone, all of this content will be available on demand for viewing, and I will also ask John and Jeremy, if they haven't done so already, to make sure they send me the decks themselves.
Yep.
So You can review the PowerPoints as well as watch the videos in the future. We'll make all that available.
Cool. And I did want to point out that even though I'm dealing with public sector entities, some of them are they're so grateful for this fantastic technology as part of the pandemic. They've done case studies for us. Here's one from New York City Department of Environmental Protection that manages and monitors the water supply for the city of New York. And they were gracious enough to do a case study. I work with a lot of New York City agencies, federal agencies, all of whom are using this technology. And I also point out that there are a bunch of great useful links in the slide deck if you're interested in Azure Virtual Desktop. One other thing before I go is there was a question a little bit earlier about estimating bandwidth that I just wanted to point out that relative to Azure Virtual Desktop, if you just, I don't want to say Google, if you Bing Azure Virtual Desktop and RDP bandwidth, it'll take you to this page. What I thought about this was very useful because Ron mentioned, sometimes the graphics workload can vary, but they did a really great job on this page of walking through it and even showing you examples of low bandwidth utilization, moderate bandwidth utilization, and high bandwidth utilization, and what the expected bandwidth would look like as part of those. So this is just a great page with a great visual representation and numbers that I wanted to point you to.